From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good morning. I'm Beecher Wiggins from the Library of Congress. On behalf of Roberta Schaefer and Library Services, we are delighted to see all of you here braving the cold for another in a series of updates on the BIBFRAME project that's being conducted by the Library of Congress. We are quite excited about what has happened since we met last, and we hope by the end of today's sessions you will agree with us that there has been progress made and it's going to help us in the community move forward. I want to alert you that we are videotaping today's session, so that means when you ask your questions during the Q&A session, you are given your permission to be videotaped and mounted and presented later. There has been some concern expressed that this is billed as a 10:30 to 11:30 slot, and we tend to go to 12. We basically want to use as much time as we can, but because we are videotaping, for those of you who have to leave, you can catch the end of it later, and the non-attendees can also see everything that's going on. Sally McCallum will begin the session and give us an update on what has transpired since we last reported in Chicago at ALA Annual. Followed by her will be two colleagues who will talk about experiments that they have either mounted or are about to mount in the coming year that will further test BIBFRAME, the model, and how it can be used for institutions and for the community. And then we will wrap up with Eric Miller giving us an update on what he and his colleagues at Zafira have been doing in terms of developing BIBFRAME Editor. And for me, that is the next step in practical application. It's a level that our operating catalogers and other information librarians can deal with in a practical way. And for me, as a manager of a large cataloging operation, that's what I've been waiting for, and that's what I'm excited about. We'll save the Q&A until the end, and I'll ask each of the presenters to introduce him or herself and what his or her role is at the local institutions. So with that, Sally.
Thank you. Thank you, Beecher. I'm just going to give you a fairly brief background introduction to where we have, what we have been doing this last year, and then also what we plan to do this next year. That's the focus of what I want to talk about. In brief, we have had a new environment developing since the 1990s. As we all know, internet, data linking, XML, RDF, Ferber, DAX, CCO, RDA, all of those have come to some sort of maturity during this last 20 years. And BIBFRAME is a major project to try to provide an alternative to MARC that is more compatible with all those developments. It's not easy because MARC permeates our environment. It will take a long time before we, in fact, come to a situation where maybe most things are in BIBFRAME, but we'll be in a dual environment for a very long time, but that's where we're headed. Over the last year, we developed a high-level model. I think most of you know that. We've had it on the website since November of 12. And we've talked about it at these sessions. Eric Miller has talked about it because it was Zafira that, in fact, developed that model. We've analyzed a number of facets of it because there are controversial parts of it, the way authorities are handled, the way annotations are handled, the way holdings are handled as an annotation, and various other things. So we've done a lot of thinking and analysis and changing our mind and switching around on some of these topics. We've been supported by a very small consultative group. They finished their work in November. They had their final meeting in November. That was George Washington University, Princeton University, OCLC, National Library of Medicine, Deutsche Bibliothek, and the British Library. They were the group that we worked with during that year to look at the various issues that were coming up. Let me make clear, it's not that we solved all the issues. We treated most of them, sometimes a little bit, sometimes a lot. We developed tools and experimented with existing data. Existing data is MARC data. And that's one reason why we asked Zafira to develop an input tool that we could use for inputting data straight into BIBFRAME rather than constantly being dependent on taking a MARC record, which was developed in with one environment in mind and converting it to BIBFRAME. But the Library of Congress staff have been working very hard on transformations, and we have been supporting transformations that changed every month for the last year. We've also carried out all this in a very open environment. As a result, all those changes we made every month always showed up, and some people felt that there was a lot of change going on, but after all, this is just the beginning. So the program for 2014 is an emphasis on test implementations. And we emphasize test implementations because at the end of a year of doing that, we will reevaluate almost every aspect of the model and of the vocabularies and everything we have. Now, we announced last week that we wanted to start a Testbed Initiative. And the parameters for participation will be developing an implementation. It can be a piece or a whole, but anything, data creation, data transfer, ingest of data, of BIBFRAME data, display of data, storage of this data, search. And there are all sorts of aspects that need to be looked at and tested with respect to this model. We are going to formalize we will ask people to formalize for the appropriate testing. We want to see functional testing. We also want to see interoperability testing, because after all, MARC was an exchange format, or is an exchange format, and BIBFRAME will be an exchange format. On the other hand, we all know that MARC was brought into our systems environment, and while no internal systems MARC looks exactly like the MARC format, it has a very close cousin to it, and so it influenced the way people structured their internal systems. We want the people who join the testbed to participate in tester discussions. It's important you don't just join and watch, you join and discuss, because you're doing something and you're writing some software and you are seeing results too. And we want to continually report these results and issues. There may be vendors who want to join the testbed. They may not want everything reported, but we will try to screen to the public as much of the reporting that's going on within the implementer's testbed as possible. So if you visit that URI, you will see something more about the requirements for joining the testbed. We will provide a coordinator so that we can all keep up with each other. Then, as a corollary to the Testbed Initiative, we are going to start a registry of implementers, because we already know that there are a few people who have experimented and implemented in this last year, and we want to start compiling that list. We know there are a few. There may be more. There probably are more, and if we don't get a list going, we're never going to know about them. And so we want to start a list. We're going to have anyone who has an existing implementation that conforms to the model in some ways or tests the model in some ways, they're developing one, they should register. If they're planning one in the very near future, they should register. It's large to small, partial to broad. If they're just testing one facet of it, fine. Please let us know, register. Other people may be interested to contact you to find out about what you're doing or what you're finding. It will have the typical information, and there is the URI for looking at how to register. So to support the implementation testing, what we're doing and what we have been doing, have done, is establish a core vocabulary. We actually published that just last week. And we will now, I'm saying here 1.0 because we will now start keeping up with all changes to it. All changes will be noted in it. We have tried to update all of our transformations software. We've tried to implement, run through all of the test sets we have on the website through this, the transformation software again, so that it all conforms to this, this vocabulary. It's not perfect. Over this next month, I'm sure we'll be finding some issues with what we've done or our transformations, but we will straighten it out. We will be working very hard to do that. We're going to provide downloadable, some basic software components, and one of them is the input module. And that's what Eric Miller is going to be talking about later. That will be something that is fairly basic that you can then use if you want to be join the test bed or do some testing with implementation. You can use that input module as a starter. You don't have to start from scratch. You can start with something that's really pretty interesting, as you'll see, as a first cut. But you, I'm sure, will have other ideas or ideas on how to elaborate and extend that. And that's what we're really, really looking for. We want to get you to a place where you can then start to use your own initiative to introduce new ideas, other ideas. The MARC XML to BIBFRAME transformations, we provide those as downloadables, and we will continue to provide those as downloadables. We will be, as I say, correcting and fixing them. We will be keeping a record of that kind of thing and what version of the downloadable it is. The vocabulary is in RDF now, and it will is downloadable in RDF. It is and will be downloadable in RDF, the vocabulary. We have the sample record sets that, as I say, we did run through the new vocabulary, and we they will continue to be available for people to look at and to see what's going on with respect to, if they're having a problem with respect to the conversion of data. And then we hope there'll be, this list will start to grow, that there'll be contributed tools that those of you who are in the test bed or others will want us to put up for a download, or we'll put up yourself for download, and we will cite it. There will be, over this next year, a continuation of analyses and discussions on the various topics. Aggregates, a lot needs to be done on aggregates. Holdings, there's a lot needs to be done on holdings. We've only looked at holdings for being able to obtain something. We have not looked at holdings for being able to predict whether serials, for instance, have been received. We've already started some work on moving image and recorded sound models, because there's a lot of discussion as to how that fits into RDA Ferber modeling, and whether it does. And so we want to try to fit it into the BIBFRAME model, which we think will help understand how RDA could be used with those forms of material. We also hope to be able to work with related archival and museum models, because we know that because BIBFRAME is across. It's not just RDA, it's across, it's going to be across different communities. We're also going to improve the website. We're going to have better integration of the two sites. We have these two sites. One is the loc.gov/BibFrame, and the other is the bibframe.org. Bibframe.org is where we put things like the vocabulary, which is generated from the RDF that we keep in the background, and it generates then these views of the vocabulary from that RDF file. So there are, we know that it's confusing right now as to where something is, and when you go back, you don't know which one am I supposed to go to because I can't remember where I got it the last time. So we're centralizing things on the loc.gov/BibFrame, and then you will go though to bibframe.org for a number of the technical items that we want to keep on the website. And there are now, I believe, I actually haven't checked the website today or yesterday. There are multiple views of the vocabulary. There's the model view, which is organized by the main components of the BibFrame model. There's the list view, which has all of the properties and classes in one list, and then on down, you can go on down the page and see a description of each of those properties. And then there's what we call the category view, which is organized by the functional categories of data, such as the titles, the classification data, the subject data, relationships, roles, things, agents, things of that sort. We think that that might be the view, the basic starter view if you are coming from a cataloging environment, a cataloger environment, because it speaks to you to some extent, the categories do. If you're trying to program something, you may well want to go to the other views because you're trying to build a system. But we have got a description that talks about the category view and how, why different properties are in that view. I recommend going to that description first and then looking at that view of the vocabulary if you want to find out what's, if you want to start looking at the vocabulary. So following on, after a year of this 2014, what we call the 2014 year, we're going to revise the vocabulary based on all of this experience, and then we want to begin to encourage wide implementation. But let me, again, emphasize that that doesn't mean that after 2014 we're going to turn the switch and there won't be any more MARC, because I think there'll be a dual environment for 10 years. You know, some people will never be able to get out of that environment, or they'll wander off to something else. So I think that we encouraging wide implementation just means there will start to be possibilities that you didn't have before, and depending on your interest and your capability within your institution, you will start to tap into some of those. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Reinhold Heuvelmann from the German National Library, in this case being an early experimenter and early implementer. I was invited to give an update of our BibFrame efforts at the German National Library. So I take the opportunity to share what we did over the last year, what are the most visible results, and a view under the hood. We were able to set aside some personal resources over the last year so we could concentrate on BibFrame experimenting, which meant learning and model and vocabulary discussions internally at the German National Library and with the early experimenters group. We did a lot of public relations, writing articles, giving presentations in several contexts. But the main thing that I'm introducing today is mapping and conversion and the prototype resulting from that. I have to remind you that on the formats view, there is the Picker Plus format as an internal format in our German National Library systems, and this is the data hub to several other exchange formats. There's a gap. Maybe you see it. It's outlined. It's the old map format. We moved to the MARC format, and now we are moving further to the BibFrame format. And on the other hand, we have mappings from Picker Plus to the linked data service. It's linked data using several vocabularies, a variety of vocabularies in this case, but it's valid linked data. And the arrows mean we have conversion tables, mappings and conversion tables, sometimes back and forth, in the case of Pika to BibFrame, just into the direction BibFrame. This is the slide that I call "We are thinking in triangles." This is an extract of the mapping from Pika Plus to BibFrame. It's a section about titles. So it's done in a Microsoft Access database with a PDF and several other outputs. This is the paperwork side of the business. We give it to the programmers, and they do the programming. In this case, it's done in the framework called MetaFacture, and I've extracted some sample code from the MetaFacture conversion tables from Pika Plus to BibFrame. Won't get into details. Resulting from that, there's a link in the OPAC. I've searched for Tracy Peterson and Philadelphia as a title, and this is one of the results. You may not see very much detail, but on the right-hand side, there's a frame providing you with possible actions. I'm zooming into, and these are the possible actions. You can select it into your collection and further down do something with it. You can print it. We already had MARC 21 XML representations of this record. We already had RDF XML representation of this record, and that's the linked data service part of the action frame. And we will now introduce a link, a real-life link. Give me the BibFrame representation of this record. And in addition, there is documentation either for the linked data service and the BibFrame part. So if you click on this link, you will be given a file. At the moment, it's just called BibFrame, which is produced on the fly using this mapping and this conversion table out of the Pika format and presented to your browser. I'm asking the colleagues, the programmers for the system, to include this new BIBFRAME logo as a small icon for this, so that would be more recognizable. What you get is a text file, an RDF text file. In this case, divided into the usual namespace declarations, which I omitted. And then there's a block describing the BibFrame instance part of this Pika Plus record. And the second part is the BibFrame work. And they are interlinked in between by some kind of a workaround. You may be able to read the first line. It's a more provisional solution at the moment, as we don't have real work records in our database. We are developing algorithms to extract the work level out of the records, but at the moment they are not there, so we had to use this workaround. There are a lot of caveats for that, and the few I've listed here. The link is not yet activated. Unfortunately, there was a versioning of the new system, and it doesn't really have to do with BibFrame issues. It's just a release planning. I have been told that it will go live in February this year. An additional caveat is there's a moving wall. It's not every data is free, at least not yet. So sometimes you have to wait about a year after the regular MARC service. It's by no means complete, neither on the picker side nor on the BIBFRAME side. And of course, it's based on the vocabulary as of 2013. And there's no documentation yet. So ideas and next steps would be synchronize with the shiny new vocabulary 1.0 to catch up with the enormous efforts that the Library of Congress colleagues have invested into this new vocabulary. Internally, as I mentioned, we are trying to cluster works, and that would be beneficial for the BIBFRAME representations. And following that line, we intend to look into representing relationships between BIBFRAME works and BIBFRAME instances, respectively. We are trying to expand the BIBFRAME authority part, and we will definitely look into the holdings business of the BIBFRAME format. There will be some design features providing you with an identifier as a file name and with a valid extension of the file name so that the browser may be able to deal it more intelligently instead of just calling it BIBFRAME. And I've talked about the logo. We will try to include this into regular releases over this year, and we are thinking about bulk downloads. Summing up, it was an interesting year for us. We learned a lot, and we recognized that taking part in the development process is best done by really using the vocabulary and then trying to bring up something visible. And that's all from me. So no metaphors this time about ships or starships, although I have to admit that I was tempted to compare the BIBFRAME initiative to the famous Rosetta spacecraft project. Maybe next time. Thank you.
I'm Jackie Shea from George Washington University, while Eric's trying to hook me up here. I'm the coordinator for resource description group, and that's traditionally known as cataloging and metadata. We have called ourselves resource description for a while now. Today, I'd like to share with you from a practitioner point of view, if we ever get that up. So I title my talk as Treadmill for the Mind.
Keep going.
Okay, all right. Okay. I'm fortunate working for an institution that doesn't mind to get this hands and feet dirty, and my library administration don't have this philosophy of wait and see what others do. So we tend to jump in and get ourselves hurt in some sense. So at any rate, give you a little bit of a background. I came to GW in 2008, and like many of its peers, the process of change had taken place, and so the administration had begun a series of reorg. So by the time I got to GW, it's already at its final stage, and so the model of change is constant has become a reality, and the GW staff has embraced it and continue to see change as an opportunity to grow. It is not an easy, as I said, I title my talk as a treadmill. It all depends on the individual as well, as whether it's a harder workout or is a uphill workout or is a downhill slope. It depends on your perspective and how well or how quickly you pick up the skill set that you need. So in 2009, we answered a call for participating in RDA national test, And that was the beginning of a grueling process of workshops, webinar, trainings, and investment of individual time. And we were very fortunate to have a group of staff willing to go through the trenches with the leadership. And in 2013, we're part of the group that call ourselves as early experimenter, and that essentially opened up our eyes to a different world. And I'm hoping to take the opportunity to share with you what this meant for us, and perhaps if you are like us as a cataloging professional, what this might mean for you. So, BIBFRAME, and everybody know what it's proposed to do, and its approach is to try to dissect record into data components and begin to treat data, the text as a data, so that our work can be connected in different ways and on many different levels of granularity. And in this sense, that it has defined the classes in such a the following format: work, instance, authority, and annotation. And the key of having all these different pieces connect together through relationship. For years, decade-long tradition for us as cataloging traditional, we organize information in sequential representation according to criteria, structure, and standards. Now, all of these have been put on notice by BIBFRAME Initiative. We have, for a long time, viewed our work of describing, recording, and classifying a library item from a holistic angle, with an endpoint being the creation of a bibliographic record. And the things that we have described, put link to, allows our users to link from one document to another. And we have yet to consider all these links as an individual piece, data, that could potentially be flow around and allow us to even more freedom to connect to one another. So this change of our thinking of the anatomy of a record must occur. A record consists of various components that we are all familiar with: author, title, publisher, the concept is a topic, an event, a place. And all of these are the component should be think of as a data instead of text string. Now, from our angle, whether you consider this as a revolution or as evolution, it depending on how much time you have invested yourself into the process of thinking our data in a broader sense. Now this, if we were to begin think our data in such a manner as a component of our parts, it gives us opportunities to reassemble the data based on the concept of pivot points, so that allow us to surface our data on the web, allow others to link to it. When we began our process as the early experimenter, we did our data analysis, and to our dismay, and which probably not unique in your environment, that we collect our data over a long period of time. And so in the process, there are data that just are not useful. They are obsolete, and we never actually had the time or the economy to go back and correct those data. So like you see over here, we have close to 18% of data that are either have one or more fields that are incorrect or corrupt. And this represents 324,000 records in our system. So I'm going to walk you through a quick example of how we tackled trying to think through the process. This portion focuses on the training in a sense that we start to train ourselves how to think differently. So this is my favorite author, and I love her, but I beat her to death every time I use her as an example. So Jane Austen, here we go. One more time. She wrote this beautiful literature that I love, and it's Pride and Prejudice. So we know that she is the author. Pride and Prejudice was created by her, and we read this as a sentence to describe a fact about something. Now, if we were to try to write this in a way that the machine can transform the syntax that will convey a single fact about a resource, this is how it can be done. And the element that you see here is URI. And in this case, it's not an actionable URI. So we begin to try to train ourselves, think Jane is VF 10233, whatever the number is, and the Pride and Prejudice is LCCN, and 220, the number, the ID right there. And so if we were to expand Jane Austen as a person, we'd find out more about her. And as we go through the process for this past year, we realize how important control vocabulary and authority data is, because it will enable us to make use of the ID that we could put into the bib record and enable the linking to take place seamlessly. So you look at here, Jane Austen, she was born, that's her birthday and death date. She was a person, classified as an attribute as a female. She was born in Hants, Hampshire, England. And Hampshire is a county, and so on and so forth. Pride and Prejudice has a topic focused on courtship. So with all these elements, if we were to represent it with a URI, and it's actionable URI in our system, what more can we do? It allows us, it frees us, and the important part is it frees our data. So what can we do now? I'm taking up a lot of time describing this, so people wondering, it seems like so far ahead, how can we have a system, it's MARC, and what can we do now? Well, in July 2013, we began to play with this idea of enabling Sapphire 0, which wasn't on my radar screen at all for the longest time. And I overheard a conversation that it wouldn't be nice to have LCCN, some sort of ID embedded in our bib record. So I went fishing and was really, really surprised that, maybe Sapphire 0 could work. So we began embedded some Sapphire 0 with HTTP URI into our system, and we wanted to see how that would help the web to discover all these headings that are present with Sapphire 0. And a few months later, I was pleasantly surprised that fast, and thanks to Eric Childress, that the publish the fast using HTTP in the Sapphire 0. And I was like, yay, LCLC is doing this, so hey, that we could do this ourselves as well. But just to assure you, the data is in our local system. I'm not corrupting OCLC data. So what have we learned? We learned that having administration on our side is very important, because for us, we are a production unit. We have to push our cataloging out. We have to push all the activity out. So in order to do this kind of experiment, we need to be given some leeway in terms of working through the process. This is a learning process, and it takes time. There's some angst, and yet there's also some incredible pleasure and joy that you find along the way. So we learn how to smell the roses along the way. So what will we be doing from 2014? We actually call a team together, Burns Law Library and Himmelfarth Health Sciences Library, that we're gonna work together to see how we could come together and be the early implementer. At this point, we have established a wiki site that would be the docking area for our shared documents and our shared experiences. We are exploring some project management tool, such as IdeaScale, that would collect the ideas that people have and then rate them, to see, and then also track, see what is being done and what cannot be done, and so on and so forth. This may not be an ideal place for us, but this is one of the things that we are considering. There are several choices right now on the table that we have yet to explore, but for now, the group has come together. We have a listserv, as you see down here. There are mechanisms in place that we should be able to help one another learn along the way. So with great expectation, I'll give you Eric Miller.
My name is Eric Miller, and I'm just still trying to thaw out, to be honest. I'm fortunate enough to work with a talented group of people, and I was basically going to talk about all the early experimenters that have left, but around the audience here, there have been many of individuals from George Washington, National Libraries of Medicine, Germany, Princeton, OCLC, Library of Congress, and increasingly various different vendors and smaller regional and other international libraries that have been really sort of pushing the envelope of applying not just linked data in their library environment, but starting to converge on, in essence, various patterns that really we hope to basically highlight here in the next few slides. There are literally dozens of national libraries working on this. Part of what we were asked to do early on was to look at those patterns and really sort of identify, well, look at those implementations from the various national libraries and try to identify, in essence, patterns we saw. And other than the fact of many of these national libraries talking about using linked data, frankly, there just weren't a lot of patterns there. So while the momentum and excitement was building, the way in which we could effectively stitch and build off of each other's work really required us taking a small step back to take several steps forward in terms of identifying common themes that we saw, trying to basically document those into some common vocabularies and try to build on this momentum that many different libraries across the world could create something great of their individual linked data parts. And that's really the key part of what, at a certain level, BIBFRAME is about. It's a very lightweight model, but a very powerful one, really that tried to capture a common theme across dozens and dozens and dozens of different linked data implementations within a memory organization space, and grounding this into the very fabric of the web to start to use the web as a means of sort of control points for starting to stitch things together and based on those control points, help our users from various different perspectives better discover the assets that cross our organization and institutional boundaries. Underpinning BIBFRAME is in fact the web, and more specifically some lighter weight aspects of the data web that really allow us to create a common model for representing, exchanging, and connecting data on the web. It's a very simple model that builds on the web itself, but allows us to start to create more contextual relationships between the things that we want to talk about. So not just pointing to Jane Austen as Jackie's example was, but being very clear that this book was authored by Jane Austen and expose that relationship to the web in a way that the web can be more actionable. We can take advantage of this in more actionable ways. So the BIBFRAME approach really was taking a step back, identifying a lot of the functional requirements, balancing those creative tensions between how do we use these new frameworks for capturing the high value, the high content, the quality information that we over decades have curated, but also think ahead to new kinds of materials, new kinds of assets that are a key part in which fulfillment to our users can be accomplished. One of the other aspects, and just to level set appropriately, recognizing there is no done, there is no right, there is no finish here, or as finished or done or right as the web itself is. We sort of take for granted thinking the web is done, but there are conferences just as large of this, focusing on designing underlying standards and technologies for helping it evolve, helping it grow, helping it be more effective as well. So the notion of recognizing that by designing a high-level model that really helps tie together a lot of the simple patterns we've seen in different communities, by giving the entities that we talk about, people, places, concepts, and their relationships, identifiers, and being part of the web, by underspecifying exactly how to use them at this particular point, and by providing ways in which we can start to use just the bits we care about to describe just the assets we care about, really allows us as a community to take advantage of these patterns, use what we need now, and really start implementing and experimenting and stitching together the various different assets that we've created collectively, but now combine them in a more effective way. So these BibFrame profiles are a way of basically constraining, if you will, a lot of these different descriptive properties, characteristics, depending on the kinds of things that we want and the kinds of assets that we want to describe. We're taking a step back. Many of us from the engineering side of this, I'm fortunate to not only to be working with standards that have basically lasted 45 years, but as hobbies, I work on motorcycles that last 45 years. Looking at these things from very complex systems perspective, but recognizing that as important of those engineering design principles are, when there's a problem or when someone needs to fix something or oftentimes when someone wants to work on something, the reality is something as simple as just a part of that is all I want to focus in on. And so we start to think about these very large frameworks that support very large community assets, but when we want to narrow in and be very concrete about how we use these, sometimes the smaller subset, simpler is in fact better. And these profiles basically allow us to take these very large, complex systems and really sort of constrain them down to just the kinds of things that we care about, or just the kinds of assets that we want to start connecting together. So I want to step us through a very practical example and then show really, the heart of what I mean by, stitching all this together. So basically 1920, 1919, George Barkley was a fighter pilot, the British Air Force. One of the interesting aspects that he did was document a tremendous amount of his flight experiences, not just where he went, but how he was feeling, how his comrades were feeling, the conditions of the field, the conditions of the experience. That his notes basically were the basis of this book on the left, Fighter Pilot, the Self-Portrait of George Barkley. He unfortunately was shot down at a very early age. Only after his death did they find all of this material, and that culmination of that material basically became this book. A few years ago, that book was reissued. Additional material was found. A new introduction was made. A new title was made. Basically, from an RDA perspective, a new variant of this work was created. The first record you see on the left is the original MARC record that was created for the original book. The second record you see on the right is the new MARC record in RDA that you've seen for the new book. And the mechanisms for expressing, you know, this new book is a variant of this old book are captured in, you know, the appropriate fields that basically, you know, a human can easily understand, but are from the web entirely opaque. We can read this text and see the fact that, oh yes, this second record, this second book is a variant of the first book because it's in this particular field, but from the web, there's no actionable data that basically one could help in the discovery process. So one of the aspects we do with BibFrame is start to think about how we deconstruct these assets that we're dealing with. We separate the content from the carrier. We start to create these relationships to the authors and their various subjects. Again, for the new books, we do exactly the same thing. We give these new books identifiers. We draw the same relationships to the authors and to the subjects, and now to the new publishers that are republishing this work. And what we want to achieve in more of a actionable web of this bibliographic data is to draw relationships from, you know, in fact, this new book to this old book in a way that the web can understand, and we can benefit from all of the aspects of what that entails. So it's at a certain level, you know, from a MARC, RDA, traditional bibliographic perspective, you know, we're accomplishing very similar goals, but what we're doing is basically making the descriptive practices that we are familiar with more actionable to the web and to a larger community that's around them. And by taking advantage of the web as a platform, we can start to, you know, identify without necessarily having to go back and edit the original MARC record. For example, in that previous case, the original MARC record was not edited. It was not updated to reflect that there's a new edition. But by simply taking advantage of linking to these new assets, we can, in fact, add additional value back from the old assets as those new links occur. So I want to basically, you know, we talk a lot about, or we show a lot about the value of identifiers or, you know, these node and arc diagrams. And one of the challenges that we thought amongst working with the early implementers is, how can we make this just more concrete? How can we, you know, from the standpoint of the engineering, we feel like we've got something quite interesting, but from the end user perspective, from the cataloging perspective, how can we start to really sort of demonstrate, you know, the value of what all this means? So this is a prototype that, in fact, we've developed to, you know, at a certain level help focus the discussion. So all of the identifiers, for example, that you just saw from Reinhold or Jackie in terms of author and subject and using URIs, you know, we in this community do a very good job nurturing those and creating those authority assets. I don't need to explain VOF or id.loc.gov. For those that may not be familiar with, the Food and Agricultural Organization has things called AgriVoc. Other communities build this. If folks don't know about this, a couple days ago, the Getty released a tremendous amount of their controlled vocabularies as linked data. So this notion of our memory organizations curating these assets, in fact, are pretty common. But now using them as part of the web, we can start to do additional things that we were never able to, or we weren't as easily able to do before. So I'm going to just take a quick diversion and basically catalog, let's say, that new Battle of Britain pilot book in BibFrame, you know, using RDA and the patterns and the cataloging rules that make sense. So I'm going to type in Battle of Britain. Pilot. And can I spell this in a way that doesn't embarrass me too much? The self for, and apparently I cannot do this without embarrassing, percentage of an RAF fighter. I'm going to just and so George Barkley, George Barkley. So now what you see here is basically in real time, what we're doing is connecting to a lot of these authority services that are starting to be part and expose these identifiers as part of the web. So in fact, I'm going to choose George Barkley on the VIF. Humphrey, E-H-R-E, Hump. Yeah, so you know, the funny thing is I actually can't seem to type when people are looking or when they're not. How do you spell his name? P-H-R-R-E-W. R-Y-W? Okay, I'm gonna embarrass myself and just pick somebody. The point is, if you could spell, what you're doing is basically looking ahead to the authority services that are in fact registered over here. So these are real-time ways in which I can connect not only to VIAF, my local authority services that I create, the id.loc.gov services that are available, the FAST services, the AgriVox services. So these become sort of control points that allow me, you know, to, in essence, link to the various assets as I'm creating the content. And by doing so, all of those identifiers that we have a tendency of basically putting up on the screen are never seen to the human, and as rightly they should not be. We want to take advantage of these identifiers and the authorities in which we, both in the library community and around the library community, are creating, but provide the tools to make this absolutely easier. So if I basically, so fighter pilot, aha, a self-portrait. And I can keep going through this. I save it back to this particular store. But in essence, I can also, you know, as any good system should do, allow me to take this data and start to use it outside of the system in new ways. So what you're looking at in here, and I'm not going to go through the various different angle brackets, but this is, in essence, your MARC record, only in the web. This is what BIBFRAME provides, and this is what the ability of starting to wrap and expose all of these new identity services in a calm way allow us as people to start connecting together. So we're able to basically make this happen in part because of the hard work of many of people that are in this room right now, creating and nurturing and curating these authorities, starting to use the web to expose these. We wrap and expose those as BIBFRAME authorities. We connect those assets together through the properties that make sense depending on the kind of things that we're describing, in this particular case, you know, a physical book. And we can capture and make those relationships possible and expose those directly to the web, use those internally in our system, provide new ways of delivering this information, and really taking advantage again of a much more cooperative nature that we in this community have nurtured for so long. So I'm going to quickly go back here to the talk and continue, because there is more. One of the things that's quite interesting about George Barkley is, in fact, some of the other work that we're involved in is around genealogy, personal archives, personal data management, and again, using these assets, in fact, as the web. Well, it turns out that there is a tremendous amount of additional material about George Barkley available in other memory organizations. This is the postcard, basically the telegram informing George Barkley's parents of his death. These were some of the other documentations that he wrote that never made it into either of these books. his parents made available a tremendous amount of photographs of him as a pilot, as a child, and the personal legacy that surrounds this particular individual has actually been the basis of a lot of very interesting additional research that unfortunately is completely lost from the traditional library environment, but through these identifiers have the potential of being connected and, more importantly, have the potential of adding value to our patrons that are coming to us and looking for it. Not because all of this data may be, inside of our single database or inside of our single library, but because we're starting to expose the identifiers for these people, for these topics, and lower the cost in which we as a larger memory organization community can start connecting this together. I'm going to switch gears slightly and then bring something back. This is another problem of mine. I like music, and for me it's a very difficult time to sort of organize, in fact, my music collection. My wife is a librarian. My filing system has no discernible logic to it. It drives her absolutely crazy. But in part because the way I like to think about things and the way I like to organize things is slightly different. I recently had the opportunity of basically visiting Culpeper, Virginia at the Library of Congress's, I don't need to explain this to you, you guys know this. This is my problem. This is their problem on a Tuesday. This is their audio problem on a Tuesday. Again, a tremendous amount of information, but a very difficult time basically, not just cataloging, which is an intensive process, but cataloging in an efficient and effective and a way that helps really sort of accelerate this particular process. Can people hear that? All right. Frankly, it's not personal audio genre that I like, but there's actually a very large bit of audio material that actually is about World War I, Royal Air Force fighting, motivational music. Again, I use this as sort of an interesting exercise of building using the BibFrame vocabulary, starting to think about assets along this line. And using these tools just at a certain level to basically start to describe some of my particular assets that I care about. One of the things that I find very frustrating using my library for searching for music is one of the assets that I look for, in fact, from music, and frankly, some of the assets that most people that are collecting vinyl look for is actually the recording engineer. Anything, for example, Rudy Van Gelder, that actually is available and recorded by Rudy Van Gelder, I will buy regardless of this. It was so satisfying being able to add an additional property to this and being able to use the existing tools and infrastructure that the library community have provided to allow me to connect various different vinyl assets to the recording engineers they care about. I'm not suggesting that we in the cataloging world start basically capturing recording engineer. We have a lot of things to do. Our time is critical. There's a lot of things going on. But there are very dedicated and passionate individuals and groups that are more than happy to actually add value to our records using our infrastructure, using this same framework, and enhancing the assets that we create so that they are more discoverable to the communities they particularly care about. Further, one of the interesting aspects of this kind of editing environment is I can actually start to, in this particular case, create data drop zones that allow me to quickly add not just properties and links to different authorities, but capture information and images that are perhaps about the object, drop them into these drop zones, and use the editor and use the web and use the machines to do a lot of the heavy lifting that we as humans would have traditionally had to do. Capture, for example, image bit depth, file size, file format, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really about not only using the web to sort of start to link things together, but using the web and a lot of tools that have been developed outside of the library community to create the process of cataloging, relating, and contextualizing the assets that we care about easier for us, and the means in which we can start to engage dedicated communities to complement and add value to the work that we're doing all along the way. And further, starting to use the library as a very interesting platform to start to bind this material together. Now, you know, the two books basically pointing at the same subject, you know, might be found here in your local library. Me connecting my audio files to the same subject, you know, certainly won't be part of your library, but what this allows me to do is basically start to build interfaces that I can basically look through my discography, and as I see shared subjects, be informed of new books that might be relevant to me. So in essence, leverage the library assets that are made available, but in the interfaces, in the context, in the environment that where I'm currently looking for them, have those surface to me. So not everyone, it's about driving them to a particular website, but as we start thinking about linked data and the linked data services library provides, using those as a way of driving relevant content to the users where they're at when they need it. So I want to just wrap up here with a little bit of benefits and lessons learned from this experiment and sort of start to highlight again some of the interesting aspects of what the web and linked data as a platform basically provide, and what BIBFRAME in the context of a web platform can enable. This is WordPress. This is I don't need to explain this. This is blogging software. When you create a blog, you write something, you publish it to the web. If someone else cites that published blog, or someone else writes another article about this and cites it, you see in essence at the bottom of the first blog sort of the citation that automatically gets linked into it. So if somebody basically likes or refutes or supports from the second blog pointing to the first, that link automatically basically shows up. This isn't a WordPress thing, this isn't a Drupal thing, this isn't a Blogger thing. This is actually just a very simple aspect of taking advantage of what's generally referred to as pingback or trackbacks or web triggers. Being able to get notified of the incoming links and do a particular action based on that. In the case of blogs, show the snippet in which the original blog was cited. We can start thinking about our cataloging, and the example of the BibFrame editor is just one example of that. We can start thinking about those same principles as a very same way in which we curate data and we build off of each other's collective knowledge. So in this particular first case of sort of creating, for example, a new bibliographic record about the Battle of Britain pilot that pointed to the old record, which was Fighter Pilot, I create basically a link from one record to another. By creating that link, the first person or application that travels that link signals that ping back, and I can get notified as the original author, or if I have permission to edit the original record, that I have an incoming link. Would you like to reciprocate? So the notion of updating now, not just creating and linking existing content to old content, but making it easy with the human in the loop to, within a single click, reciprocate and link back, is part of the very platform the web enables. So when we start talking about time and efficiency and connectivity, again, not only do we take advantage of the discovery aspects of the web or the new ways in which users might find our assets on the web, but by creating these additional links, we actually also start the potential of curating and nurturing and connecting our legacy information with our new information, and creating a richer tapestry of knowledge that can basically be more action, that basically we can take more action. If someone would have stumbled upon the first fighter pilot web catalog record, they would have not known that a new book exists. This kind of capability allows, with one single click, that reciprocal relationship to happen. As easy as one cites a blog and injects a citation, we as a community can start imagining how to do this for the data that we particularly care about. It's not additional infrastructure, it's part of the very foundation of the web. We're building off of not things necessarily that we've created in the library community, but things that the larger community have basically developed. We can start to adapt them to lower the social, technical, and organizational costs of managing our data in a collaborative, decentralized environment that we live in. Further, taking advantage of the same kind of business analytics or PageRank analytics or the analytics that we start to see associated with documents, again, by being part of the very fabric of the web, we can start to see the ways in which more effectively our users are accessing our information, are linking to our information, are creating ways in which to describe information so that we're better informed not only how our information is being used, but, you know, gaps in which we might want to fill in terms of acquisitions, areas in which we might want to beef up in terms of localized community interest, et cetera, et cetera. Again, taking advantage of the web and taking advantage of a lot of work that's going on in terms of understanding user behavior outside of the web can be directly applied here back into our community to make our decisions of how we interact with the communities we serve far more informed at far lower costs than we've been able to do before. So just quickly in conclusion, the profiles basically allow us a way of taking advantage of the very powerful capabilities the BIBFRAME framework enables, but constraining it into ways in which we as catalogers or we as individuals trying to manage just the information we care about can get our minds around. Really just only the parts that we need, but doing it in using global standards and global mechanisms for connecting it to a larger set of services. You know, the big wins happen, in fact, by stitching together a lot of small ones. And these profiles give us the ability to stitch those small wins together. The editor is an example of how one might start thinking about stitching these things together in a very practical, simple, frankly, almost fun way. I know cataloging and fun never gets generally used in the same sentence, but, you know, I'm going to say it. You know, cataloging in a fun way of being able to organize our assets and start to share them more effectively. But it's also a way of basically grounding the discussion. You know, we as folks working on standards and technologies, you know, many of us coming at this from sort of an engineering or information management perspective, you know, the design, the principles, the models that we're developing are, you know, very exciting to us. But what does that really mean to the end user? What does that really mean to the cataloger? What does that really mean to the discovery layer? You know, this was an attempt to try and sort of help ground those discussions so that when people start talking about the value of identifiers and these circles and nodes and pointing back and forth, you know, this was an example of trying to basically show how we can start stitching together that data in a way that practically means something and means something very concrete to us. We're only in the early stages of this, but to be honest, the results are incredibly promising. Finally, and just full disclaimer, you know, no Legos were harmed during the creation of this talk. And to learn more, frankly, about everything to do about BibFrame, again, we can't echo enough, bibframe.org. You know, that will be the place, and that will continue to be the place where the vocabularies, the models, the documentation, et cetera, is being tracked. If you are interested in learning more about some of the very specific things, you know, to help us help you, you know, please let us know if there's a specific aspect of the profile or the editor or the tools or the authority modeling. You know, if you're interested in something very specific, there's other links there that will basically help you indicate your interest and help us let you know when the relevant information and material is available. Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.